Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 with me, Patryk Witkowski, and I am joined today by the SNP MSP Maureen Watt for Aberdeen South and North Kincardine. Hello.
Hi, Patrick. Just to correct it, I'm retired. I've been retired since the
Oh,
last
I'm sorry.
Scottish
I
Parliament
thought I double
election.
checked right
I'll keep
before the
it in
show.
mind.
I must have missed.
No
Many
worries.
apologies. So for our first story of the day, we have a Ukraine update, day 770 of a conflict. A Ukrainian drone struck the primary unit of the third largest Russian oil refinery in the Tatarstan region, more than 1,100 kilometers, 690 miles from Ukraine. One of their deepest attacks into Russia yet. Russia claimed to have intercepted a drone meant to strike Tatneft's Tenneco refinery, which has a production capacity of about 360,000 barrels of oil a day. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday signed into law a measure lowering the army mobilization age from 27 to 25. Mobilization has been a divisive issue in a nation exhausted by more than 2 years of war with Russia, which has seen huge military losses. But the move comes as Ukraine lacks soldiers to battle the Russian invasion now in its third year. NATO foreign ministers are meeting today to discuss how to put military support for Ukraine on a long-term footing, including a proposal for a 100 billion euro 5-year fund and the plan seen as a way to Trump-proof aid for Ukraine, for Kiev specifically. The proposals by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg would give the Western alliance a more direct role in coordinating the supply of arms, ammunition, and equipment to Ukraine, diplomats say. The plans will be discussed during a 2-day meeting in Brussels that will celebrate the 75th anniversary of the founding of NATO and prepare for a summit of alliance leaders in Washington in July. A register of damages for Ukraine opened formally in The Hague during a conference bringing together senior ministers and officials from Ukraine, the Netherlands, and European institutions. Ukrainians can enter claims for damage to their property as a result of Russia's invasion via a new mechanism launched on Tuesday, with officials expecting as many as 10 million requests overall. The initial launch focuses on claims of damage or destruction to residential property from the invasion. Between 300,000 and 600,000 claims are expected in this category. Russia has announced new military commanders in the wake of a Moscow concert hall attack claimed by Islamic State and amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry on Tuesday announced that it was appointing several officers to senior military positions. Admiral Alexander Moiseev was appointed head of the Navy. Vice Admiral Konstantin Kabantsov was appointed as commander of the Northern Fleet. Vice Admiral Sergei Pinchuk was named as commander of the Black Sea Fleet. The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has said it is absolutely essential that Ukraine gets more munitions and air defenses when speaking to media in France on Tuesday. France announces plans to oppose EU-wide level sanctions on Russian companies spreading disinformation. Piotr, Piotr Versilov, the unofficial spokesperson of a feminist opposition group, Pussy Riot, has been sentenced in absentia by a Moscow court to 8 years and 4 months in jail for criticizing the war in Ukraine online. He left Russia in 2020 and announced last year that he had joined the Ukrainian army, although it is unclear if he is still there. Reuters reports he could not immediately be contacted for comment. Russia accused International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach on Tuesday of taking part in a conspiracy. Let me read this again, sorry. Russia accused International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach on Tuesday of taking part in a conspiracy with Ukraine to exclude its strongest athletes from this year's Paris Games. Maureen, what do you make of the ongoing Ukraine-Russia situation?
Well, it's really good to have this update, Patrick, because it's slipped off the agenda in many of the mainstream media outlets. Clearly, it's a really difficult situation for Ukraine at the moment. And I think that's highlighted by the announcement that they're reducing the age of conscription from 27 to 25. Still pretty high when you think that during the Second World War, I think uh, young uh, young men of the age of 16 and 17. Although I think the conscription age was 18 or 19, who going to war. Nevertheless, it is a difficult situation. It's interesting to see that Europe, who are obviously most affected by the war in Ukraine and so near its own borders, are looking to finance proof the contributions to Ukraine in the wake of the possibility, or in light of the possibility of a Trump presidency. So, it all looks like a long drawn out war, doesn't it, rather than something that's going to be halted and any conclusion of it anytime soon.
Thank you, Maureen. Moving on to our Israel-Gaza latest. The latest figures from the Gaza Health Ministry show at least 32,975 Palestinians have been killed, and 75,577 have been injured in Israeli strikes on Gaza since the 7th of October. The bodies of 6 foreign aid workers killed in a Gaza strike were expected to be transported out via Egypt today. Israeli bombardment killed 7 staff of a US-based food charity Work Central Kitchen, the WCK, on Monday in an attack that UN Chief Antonio Guterres labeled unconscionable and an inevitable result of the way the war is being conducted. WCK founder Jose Andres described the 7 people killed on a WCK mission as in Gaza on Monday as the best of humanity. Joe Biden said that Israel is not doing enough to protect aid workers and has called for a swift investigation into the Israeli Defense Forces (IDF) drone attacks in Gaza, which killed the 7 people working for the WCK charity. Early on Wednesday, the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, put the strike down to misidentification. Rishi Sunak called for an urgent investigation into the deaths of 3 British aid workers working for the WCK, who were killed by the Israeli airstrike that hit an aid convoy in Gaza. The UK citizens killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza will be remembered as heroes, their families have said. James Kirby, 47, John Chapman, 57, and James Henderson, 33, were among 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers killed on Monday. The humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza seems likely to worsen after charities announced they are suspending operations in the territory in the aftermath of an Israeli drone attack, which repeatedly targeted a clearly identified convoy of international aid workers, killing 7. Calling the decision an unprecedented step, Anera said the killings, alongside the loss of numerous other aid workers and their families, has led our team to conclude that delivering aid safely is no longer feasible. End quote. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said he had spoken with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, telling him that Australians were outraged over the death of aid worker Zomi Frankom in an Israeli airstrike. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly called on Wednesday for a full investigation into the killing of aid workers in Gaza, among whom was a Canadian citizen, by an Israeli airstrike. Speaking on the sidelines of a NATO foreign ministers meeting in Brussels, Joly said Israel needed to respect international law, adding Canada would make sure that it does. Prosecutors in the home city of a Polish aid worker killed in Gaza launched an investigation into his killing, reported the state news agency PAP today. The UN Human Rights Council will consider a draft resolution on Friday calling for an arms embargo on Israel, citing the plausible risk of genocide in Gaza. If the draft resolution is adopted, it would mark the first time that the UN's top rights body has taken a position on the war in Gaza. An ongoing Lebanese army investigation has determined that a landmine injured 3 UN military observers and a translator last week, a judicial official said today. Maureen, what are you thinking when you're hearing of this, of the ongoings in the Israel-Gaza conflict?
It's just unimaginable, really. I mean, I just can't imagine being in the middle of this. And I think the killing of the aid workers, who, let's not forget, were in 3 different vehicles on different parts of a highway, had notified the IDF of their existence and their movements. How can anybody think that it was anything other than targeted strikes? I mean, some of them had moved off the road because they had heard that they were being targeted and still lost their lives. It's unimaginable. And, you know, the World Central Kitchen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think those were the ones who were shipping food latterly from Cyprus. They were responsible for organising that. A credible organisation trying to help people under siege, suffering from malnutrition, and all the imaginable killing of their relatives and friends and maiming of their relatives and friends. I mean, I think it's just absolutely awful. And those countries who are still supporting Israel really need to take a long, hard look at themselves, because I bet you most of their populations are really against this war.
And sticking with our Israel coverage, recently it was revealed that Israel is using AI to identify and kill targets in Gaza. The Israeli military's bombing campaign in Gaza used a previously undisclosed AI-powered database that at one stage identified 37,000 potential targets based on their apparent links to Hamas, according to intelligence sources involved in the war. In addition to talking about their use of the AI system, called Lavender, the intelligence sources claim that Israeli military officials permitted large numbers of Palestinian civilians to be killed, particularly during the early weeks and months of the conflict. Their unusually candid testimony provides a rare glimpse into the first-hand experiences of Israeli intelligence officials who have been using machine learning systems to help identify targets during the 6-month war. Israel's use of powerful AI systems in its war on Hamas has entered uncharted territory for advanced warfare, raising a host of legal and moral questions, and transforming the relationship between military personnel and machines. This is unparalleled in my memory, said one intelligence officer who used Lavender, adding that they had more faith in a statistical mechanism than a grieving soldier. Everyone there, including me, lost people on October 7th. The machine did it coldly, and that made it easier. Another Lavender user questioned whether humans' role in the selection process was meaningful. Response was, I would invest 20 seconds for each target at this stage, and do dozens of them every day. I had zero added value as a human, apart from being a stamp of approval. It saved a lot of time. The testimony from the 6 intelligence officers all who had been involved in using AI systems to identify Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad (PIJ) targets in the war was given to journalist Yuval Abraham for a report published by the Israeli-Palestinian publication Plus 972 magazine and the Hebrew language outlet Local Call. Four of the sources said that at one stage early in the war, Lavender listed as many as 37,000 Palestinian men who had been linked by the AI systems to Hamas or PIJ. Lavender was developed by the Israel Defense Forces Elite Intelligence Division, Unit 8200, which is comparable to the US's National Security Agency or GCHQ in the UK. Several of the sources described how, for certain categories of targets, the IDF applied pre-authorized allowances for the estimated number of civilians who could be killed before a strike was authorized. Two sources said that during the early weeks of the war, they were permitted to kill 15 or 20 civilians during airstrikes on low-ranking militants. Attacks on such targets were typically carried out using unguided munitions known as dumb bombs, the sources said, destroying entire homes and killing all their occupants. According to conflict experts, if Israel had been using dumb bombs to flatten the homes of thousands of Palestinians who were linked, with the assistance of AI, to militant groups in Gaza, this could help explain the shockingly high death toll in the war. Maureen, passing over to you. Israel obviously expects a lot of trust from a lot of countries over its operational habits. Do you think that that trust is extra damaged when these previously undisclosed experimental methods of warfare are revealed?
I think I finished my last little piece by saying that these countries need to take a long, hard look at themselves, the governments of these countries who are still supporting Israel. And you've just given me loads of other reasons why this should be the case. I mean, we talk about conflicts moving into a different sphere using drones and other techniques, yet we see in both Ukraine and, well, more in Ukraine, trench warfare and, ordinary military warfare, tanks and snipers and personnel gunning down people in Gaza. I don't think we should be surprised that Israel is using even greater technology or newer technology and testing it out. Israel's pretty advanced in these kind of things. But if your quote is correct, that they're permitted to kill up to, 20 or 6
Yeah,
or
15 to
20
20
civilians.
for a
15.
low-ranking military officer, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely terrible, absolutely awful. And, I have said many times on this program that Netanyahu's sole aim is to completely obliterate not just Hamas, but Gaza as a functioning entity completely. And, he's more or less succeeded in that. And I know that there are talks going on in Egypt and other parts of the Middle East, but nothing seems to be coming to fruition. And it just seems as if Netanyahu is being left to, as I say, just obliterate Gaza. It must be one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes in history, really. And I cannot see how Israel can recover from this internationally. I mean, just getting rid of Netanyahu when the Israelis managed to get rid of Netanyahu isn't going to cut it, I don't think. So it, the, the cauldron of the Middle East carries on.
Thank you, Maureen. And it seems like a lot of people share your view. As for our next story, calls are growing for the UK government to ban arms sales to Israel. As the death toll of humanitarian workers in Gaza surpasses 190, First Minister Hamza Yousaf has called for an immediate end to arms sales from the UK to Israel in a letter to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The First Minister's letter comes as UK government ministers are under growing pressure from Tory MPs and peers to stop arming Israel. Um, to stop arming Israel after the killing of 7 humanitarian aid workers by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. Their intervention follows an their intervention follows an intervention by Peter Ricketts, who was a government national security advisor during David Cameron's premiership, who said at the time has come to send a signal and stop exporting arms. David Jones, the Conservative MP for Clyde West, said the Israeli airstrike on the aid convoy was extraordinary. Labour's facing challenges to maintain a united front on the issue were were also apparent today during a joint appearance in London by the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves and the London Mayor Sadiq Khan, when Mr. Khan said there was now a case for halting arms sales. Asked if she agrees, Reeves reiterated the party line that Labour was urging the government to publish any reports if it had on Israel's compliance with international law. A majority of voters in the UK now back a ban on arms sales to Israel, according to a YouGov poll, one of the first up-to-date assessments of whether Israel is losing public support in key allied states. Research also suggests most people believe the Israeli government is violating human rights in Gaza. The loss of public support in the UK will alarm Israel, which has always relied on UK backing. The poll was commissioned by Action for Humanity and conducted after the death of 7 aid workers who were killed by an Israeli airstrike. Maureen, if there was to be a vote on arms sales, do you think the views and the vote of MPs would line up to the views of the public in the UK?
Well, over the issue of Gaza, they haven't up till now, have they? And, Labour have had to be pulled kicking and screaming to a position where they are not outright supporting Israel anymore. The thing about arms sales is there are 2 points really I'd like to make. One is if Britain doesn't sell them arms, someone else will. That I just want to point out. Secondly, I think you're right, Patrick, that as I've said before, that Britain is one of the countries where the population are not reflected in government action, or the population's wishes are not reflected in government action so far with regard to the Israel-Gaza conflict. Whether this was put to a vote in the House of Commons and whether it would have the backing of the majority of MPs at this juncture, I really couldn't say. I wouldn't hold my breath that that would happen. I hope it would, but I wouldn't hold my breath. But if it did happen, I think that would be a major, major blow to Israel, who see the UK as one of their 2, perhaps, major allies in this conflict, along with the US. And we've seen the US changing their tune now. Antony Blinken has been very strong about what he wants to see a ceasefire in Gaza. So moving on to the question of arms, opens up a whole new area of where governments we'll see whether governments are listening um, to their populations. And that there has been calls from Stephen Flynn to recall Parliament,
I was
whether
just about
it's
to ask you about that actually. Yeah.
particularly on this issue. So I don't think it'll happen. People are not going to come flocking back from their skiing holidays. But I think he's right to issue that call, because um, clearly, if Israel are continuing to get supplies of arms and munition, albeit in once they capture Rafah and do what they want to do, erase that part of Gaza, what else do they do? At what point do they say then we have obliterated Hamas?
Hmm.
And does it, as we've seen on what you said earlier, Patryk, mean their relatives and friends who are only, family members of people who they identify as being members of Hamas? So although you would think that they were near the end of having obliterated Gaza, um, goodness knows what they'll do to justify continuing occupation of Gaza. So to me, it's all up in the air. But in terms of politics here in the UK, I suspect that this will be an issue brought up pretty quickly after the MP's return on what's a week on Monday or whenever.
And you would support the ending of sales of arms to Gaza yourself.
Um, well, yes, but I mean, it needs to be unilateral, doesn't it? It needs to be all countries who supply arms to agree not to supply arms, does it not? I mean, it's a bit like nuclear weapons. The gap's going to be, or drugs, the gap's going to be filled by somebody else. Um, so it's got to be multilateral.
I
Um,
think, yeah, but I think that's interesting, and I understand why you would say that. But isn't it something? Isn't it a unique thing when it's your country with like the population? If we agree that like if we were to say that the population of the UK doesn't want arms being sent, and we agree that and we were to agree that like the UK shouldn't be sending arms, isn't it something specifically when the UK itself is doing it, even if other countries are or aren't?
yeah, so you would have a motion, something, that Britain intends to cease the supply of arms. See, one of the things about the supply of arms and other things is, if you take Russia as an example, and the sanctions against Russia, they're being broken all the time by goods being sold by Britain to third countries and then them being forwarded on to Russia. So, and then that's always been the thing with sanctions. So yes, you can call for um, the cessation of selling arms, but will they go indirectly? These are the kind of things that you need to think about. Nothing's ever straightforward, Patryk, as you'll
Of course.
discover.
Thank you, Maureen. For our next story, the Labour Party membership falls by 165,000 to 366,600 since 2019, as polls suggest them winning 154-seat majority at the general election. Late's figures show that Labour has fewer members than it did under Jeremy Corbyn. At the end of 2019, the party's membership was more than 532,000. In a report last week to the party's National Executive Committee, David Evans, Labour's General Secretary, said it was just above 366,600. There had been a drop of 23,000 in the previous 2 months, despite Labour leading the Conservatives in polls by 20 percentage points or more, with the numbers potentially depressed by concern over the party's policy on Gaza and the watering down of its 23 billion a year green investment pledge. Since the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, Labour's refusal over many weeks to call for a ceasefire led to the resignation of at least 70 Labour councillors. It also triggered a loss of control in four councils: Oxford, Burnley, Hastings, and Norwich. At the same time, the party leader, Sir Keir Starmer, faced rebellions by many of his own MPs, as well as frontbench resignations. Meanwhile, today, a YouGov poll has suggested that Labour are on course to win more than 400 seats and a majority of 154. In Scotland, the poll suggests Labour would win 28 seats, with the number of SNP MPs falling by just 19, with the Lib Dems and Tories getting 5 seats each. Uh, Sorry, I didn't catch that. Uh, Sorry. Let's see. Labour would win 28 seats, with the number of SNP MPs falling to just 19. So that's 19 SNP MPs in the predicted polling the polling suggesting so far. Um, Maureen, so does lower membership imply less of a sort of grassroots base, which in turn impacts canvassing and rallying? And is that something that it could potentially massively hurt Labour come election time?
Yes, potentially. I think this links very much to what we've been talking about, which is Gaza. And clearly, a lot of members of the Labour Party have discontinued their membership over Gaza. Some, of course, will have stopped their membership because of their rolling back on their commitment to spend billions on green policies. But I think it's mainly on Gaza, and this is what we were talking about earlier about how political parties are not reflecting the will of the country, or in this case, even their membership. And if I was in the Labour Party, would be deeply worried about this because we have seen the millions and millions that just one donor has been giving to the Tory party in recent months. And no party is in a position to match that spending. Now, where the Tories don't have boots on the ground to the same extent as other parties to go around canvassing, they've got this money to spend and on other methods. And the Labour Party, as we saw in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election, are very good at bussing in people from other parts of the country to by-elections to do that door knocking that's required to get the information to get your vote out. Now, that's not going to happen in a general election because activists are going to stick with their own constituencies. But it is really significant that the membership has fallen because that means the activist base has fallen as well, and people who will talk about Labour Party policies if they come out with any among their friends and relations and work colleagues and things. So I think it's deeply worrying for the Labour Party, and if they don't start listening to their base, then it is clearly going to affect them in polling day because these polls are snapshots of what's happening now. And we know, as I said, that the Tories have got huge, massive resources that they can fling at a general election.
I see. And with polling like this and with the way that these numbers are handled, what does this mean for Scotland specifically? Is this polling seat representation representative of like the thoughts of people in Scotland?
Do you know who did the polling, Patryk? Which
This was
organisation?
YouGov.
The YouGov. Okay, so it's not as reliable as Ipsos Mori, for example, but it's just one poll. It's not good if it's down to 19 for the SNP, but hey, I've been in the party 50 years next month, and seen things like this happen before. And clearly, the Labour Party are on course for a massive victory if all the polls taken together um, are um, are true, or are an indication. So yeah, as as politicians being asked this question on TV will say, well, the only poll that matters is the general election. So let's wait and see. There might be a shift, and that something else comes up
Right.
before the
And
next
also,
poll's taken, and other
yeah,
and other matters affecting those um, who are asked. And I mean, sometimes it can be as few as 1,000 people that the poll is based on, and if you divide that
mm,
throughout the whole of the UK, it's why most people have never ever been asked what their views are by a pollster.
of course. And also, just linking with your point earlier of mentioning how Gaza interplays into this, and also from the story itself, um, there are similarities of with this, but with how much support Labour lost over the Iraq War as well with Tony Blair. Um, do you do you see this having like just as much pressure onto the outcomes of votes and people as it did during Iraq?
Well, that will be interesting to see what pollsters like the eminent John Curtis say on this. In the end of the day, most people vote on how they see a government performing in relation to their own circumstances, mostly economic and financial circumstances. So, there's still a general election, short, sharp 6 weeks electioneering to be gone through. And we'll have to see what the outcome of that is, because polls, as we talked about earlier, don't take into account specific circumstances. And, although the Labour Party has 366,600 members, the number of them who will be active will be quite small. And, where they are spread across the country, I mean, some will have quite high numbers of activists, some less so, as
Hmm.
with any political party. So um, it will be interesting. And as we know, regrettably, because we have a first past the post system, um, elections in this country are uh, fought on a very small number of seats normally. But I suppose with indicating a large number of seats are going to change hands, then parties' resources are going to be spread out, and you won't get that movement between constituencies that you sometimes get
Hmm.
during elections.
Thank you very much, Maureen. For our next story, CalMac CEO Robbie Drummond steps down with immediate effect. The Caledonian MacBride board has announced that CEO Robbie Drummond is stepping down with immediate effect. The board says it takes the responsibility of delivering the Clyde and Hebrides ferry service (CHFS) contract extremely seriously and recognizes that the island communities served by CalMac have faced real challenges over this past year. Um, I note that these challenges are likely. I I notes. Someone notes. The board notes that these challenges are likely to continue until new vessels are introduced to the fleet over the coming years. The CalMec board say they want to strengthen their focus on the operational performance of an aging fleet, resilience, and enhanced dialogue and responsiveness with the customers and the communities CalMac serves. CalMac have appointed Duncan Mackison, former CEO of CalMac Holding Company, David McBrain, Limited, as interim CEO until a permanent successor can be appointed. The CalMac board thanked Robbie for his efforts and wishes him well in his future endeavors. Duncan Mackison has more than 25 years' experience in senior executive roles at MD and CEO level responsibilities and is responsible for the delivery of complex outsourced service contracts to government and local government customers in a variety of sectors, including transport, defence, property, and technology. He was educated at the Glasgow Academy and began his early career as an officer in the Royal Marines. Maureen, passing over to you. What do you make of the CalMac situation, and how much will a change of CEO be responsible for the future of the situation?
Well, that we will have to wait and see. I'd like to pay tribute to Robbie Drummond and all he's done in my dealings with him on the Rural Affairs and Economy Committee. He was always a very good person to work with, always open and transparent about the problems facing CalMac. Um, CalMac, of course, are the operators of the ferries which CMAL provide them with. And I think there are two issues. One is, of course, that despite best efforts of the government, the procurement of new ferries to replace the ageing fleet has not gone to plan. And we still await the two from Ferguson's, and is it two or four from Turkey? So four from Turkey, so six in total out of a fleet of 40 odd, I think it is. So, with those coming on board, it would make a huge difference. And Robbie Drummonds has had to, um, you know, work with, as we said, an aging fleet that, even with regular servicing, parts are no longer available, and parts have had to be made for ships that break down. So he's had a really tough gig, and whether somebody coming in will be able to turn that around any better than Robbie would have, when these new ships come on board, I don't know. But it'll be interesting to see. And I've heard on news of islanders who, have said that they're sad to see him go. So yeah, but previously they would have called them all sorts of things for not uh, having their routes secured and ferries time and things. So it's
Right.
a very it's a bad situation. Will only get better when these new ferries start coming on board.
Thank you. For our next story, 9 dead and 900 injured in a Taiwan earthquake. Taiwan's strongest earthquake in 25 years has killed 9 people and injured at least 900, causing building collapses, power outages, and landslides on the island, and triggering initial tsunami warnings in southern Japan and Philippines. The fire agency said 64 people were trapped in one coal mine and 6 in another, whilst rescue workers had lost contact with 50 people who were traveling in minibuses through a national park as the earthquake wiped out phone networks. The quake, given a magnitude of 7.2 by Taiwan's Earthquake Monitoring Agency and 7.4 by the US, struck close to Hualien, a city popular with tourists on Taiwan's eastern coast, damaging buildings and trapping people amid aftershocks after the quake, which started at 7:58 a.m. Videos on social media showed children being rescued from collapsing residential buildings. One five-story building in Hualien appeared heavily damaged. Its first floor collapsed, and the bulk of the building leaning at a 45-degree angle. Taiwan's certain Center for Social for Science and yeah. Maureen, disasters like this, they they're hard to predict. They're very difficult to see. Uh, what what do you think the people are going through that are experiencing this tragedy right now?
Yes, absolutely awful. Clearly a man-made, not a man-made disaster, but a natural disaster. It is interesting, though, that with all the technology that we have, that we don't seem to be able to predict earthquakes coming. I mean, we're getting better at predicting when volcanoes are going to erupt, but not the same with earthquakes. I mean, fortunately, Taiwan is a very forward, um, democrat, forward country with developed country with lots of resources, fairly rich country. So hopefully, it will be able to recover from this disaster more quickly than, let's say, something that happened in Haiti or Puerto Rico or somewhere which is abjectly poor and is still very poor after their earthquake. So yeah, we'll monitor this.
Thank you. For now, we're shifting to America, where Trump media, saved by Russian American under criminal investigation, say reports. The Guardian is reporting that Donald Trump's social media company, Trump Media, went public last week only after it had been kept afloat in 2022 by emergency loans provided in part by a Russian American businessman who had been under federal investigation over allegations of insider trading and money laundering. With his current holding valued at $4 billion, ex President Trump stands to gain billions of dollars from a merger between Trump Media and the technology group, and the blank check company Digital World Acquisition Corporation, which took the parent company of Truth Social public. But Trump Media almost did not make it to the merger after regulators opened a securities investigation into the merger in 2021 and caused the company to burn through cash at an extraordinary rate as it waited to get the green light for its stock market debut. The situation led Trump Media to take emergency loans, including from an entity called ES Family Trust, which opened an account with Paxum Bank, a small bank registered on the Caribbean island of Dominica that is best known for providing financial services to the porn industry. The Guardian reported that it has seen leaked documents which they say shows that ES Family Trust operated like a shell company for a Russian American businessman named Anton Postolnikov, who co owns Paxum Bank and has been a subject of a years long joint federal criminal investigation by the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, DHS, into the Trump media merger. Maureen, what does he say of Donald Trump's finances, a situation like this?
I mean, he was desperate for this company to be floated on the stock market so that he could say that he's worth billions as a result of this. And I think on the back of that, he posted the bail money that he had to in some of the courts that where he's got charges against him. So, oh golly, can we be surprised that Donald Trump is involved in dodgy stuff? He's been involved in dodgy stuff, and again, Trump and a bank that supports the porn industry. I mean, you couldn't make it up. You couldn't make it up, could you?
I suppose not. For our next story, we're shifting our focus back to Scotland, where the Scottish Government consultation on banning the use of cages to keep hens. A consultation on banning the use of cages to house laying hens for egg production has been launched by the Scottish Government today. Views will be sought on the phasing out of the use of enriched cages, which offered more room to nest, roost, scratch, and rest than the previously used battery or barren cages that were banned in the UK in 2012. In 2020, a survey showed that 88% of the UK public consider using cages in farming is cruel, and 77% of these surveyed a complete ban on the use of cages in farming. Over 1.1 million hens were housed in cages in Scotland as of February 2024. Agriculture Minister Jim Fairley said, as we committed to in our programme for governments, we want to improve the welfare of laying hens to ensure their confinement does not negatively impact their normal behaviours. Significant progress has already been made in recognising the importance of animal welfare, both in government policies and the demand from the public in the choice they make when shopping. If implemented, the ban would be another example of Scotland leading the way in improving the welfare of animals by being the first UK nation to ban the practice. Maureen, what are your thoughts on free-range eggs and the banning of cages?
Well, we should point out that this is an initial consultation. I mean, there have been huge strides made in animal welfare in Scotland, and it is a leader in this field, and certainly in the welfare of hens and chickens. My understanding is that this will phase out anyway, as a result of the few farmers who still engage in this being about to retire and go out of egg production. So we should wait and see what the result of the consultation is. But I think that this, by a natural process, as more people go on to different ways of housing hens and egg-laying hens, continues. And that's all to the good.
Thank you. Sticking with the Scottish Government, there's a warning of threat to native bees from invasive aggressive hornet species. Members of the public are being urged to notify experts if they think they see a non-native hornet species. Yellow-legged Asian hornets are non-native invasive species which are aggressive predators of several species, including honeybees and other pollinators. Plans for dealing with sightings of hornets native to North India, China, and the Indo-Chinese Peninsula and the Indonesian archipelago are included in the first annual report of the Bee Health Improvement Partnership, BHIP. The report also showed positive steps in tracking cases of varroa mites, which pose the biggest threat to honeybee colonies in Scotland. A map showing the spread of a parasite and highlighting areas where the mite has not been reported, such as the islands of Colonsay and Oronsay, which are nature reserves. Which are nature reserves for Apis mellifera, AMM black bee, was shared with beekeepers across the country to highlight where particular care is needed, in order to prevent spread of a parasite into these areas. Agriculture Minister Jim Fairley said, "I am delighted to see the progress made by the Bee Health Improvement Partnership to help deliver our second 10-year Scottish Government honeybee health strategy. By developing a contingency plan to address any Asian hornet incursion in Scotland, we are well prepared to tackle and eradicate the insect before it has an opportunity to establish. We cannot underestimate the devastating impact this non-native predator has on honeybees and other insects, including important pollinators, and I urge people to be aware of what to look for and report any potential sightings." Maureen, how much control do we have over this? Asian hornet sightings happen every couple of years. This year might be the first time that some of them survived the winter. To what extent do you think we will be able to track down any potential Asian hornets before they become a significant issue for insect life here in Scotland and the UK?
Well, clearly, it's seen as an issue by food health experts. I mean, I think beekeeping and making honey is an extremely precarious um, job, or hopefully not. People don't rely on it to make a living. It's maybe a kind of sideline, but it is very precarious. And we've had these kind of warnings before, and I just hope that the news of it and this press release, which has been issued today by Jim Fairley, is spread widely so that all those who do keep bees are aware of it and look out for it in their hives early doors, so that we can keep Scotland free of these predators, which, come not just in terms of threats to the beekeepers, but also other ways that they come in all sorts of ways. We have so much trade around the world now; it's almost impossible to keep things out, and we've got to keep on our guard of that our own native species aren't destroyed by incomers.
Thank you very much. And that does wrap us up for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. Thank you again to Maureen Watt for joining me today. You were a fantastic
You're welcome.
guest. And
Thank you, Patrick. You're welcome.
goodbye, and thank you for watching.